They say Graymoor House has been waiting for decades, and it remembers everyone who ever entered. Tonight, you'll hear the story of Maya, how curiosity turned into terror, and how a house that breathes can trap more than just your body. Watch closely, because the walls are listening, and by the end, you might not leave the same. The rain came down in sheets, blurring the edges of the narrow road like water over glass. Maya gripped the steering wheel tightly as the tires of her old sedan struggled against the slick asphalt. The storm had come out of nowhere, a sudden warning. She ignored until it was too late. The townspeople had whispered warnings, of course, about Graymoor House. Strange noises, people disappearing, shadows that moved in impossible ways. But she had laughed them off. Superstition, she thought. Fear is the invention of those too weak to face reality. Yet, as the road stretched on and the last streetlights flickered out behind her, a sense of unease began to seep into her chest. The car's headlights caught the house at the end of the road, Graymoor Mansion. Its walls were massive and gray, almost blending into night sky. Its windows like black eyes staring into her soul. Even in the rain, she could see the house was impeccably maintained. Its stone walls uncracked, the roof unbroken, the gates firmly in place. It did not look abandoned. It looked waiting. The driveway seemed impossibly long, the rain making the gravel slippery and uneven. Every step closer felt like stepping deeper into some other world. The wind howled through the trees, bending their trunks and shaking loose dead leaves that swirled around the car like a miniature storm. Maya's knuckles whitened on the wheel. She could almost hear the whispers of the townsfolk as if they were standing in the shadows. "Don't go there! Don't open the door!" But she had no choice. This was her inheritance. The house her late uncle had left her. She had never known him well. Barely at all. But the papers had been clear. Graymoor House was hers. Fully, completely. She told herself this as she stepped out of the car, the rain soaking through her coat almost instantly. The wind tugged at her hair, and the gravel crunched sharply under her boots. Every instinct screamed to leave, to drive back into the safety of the town lights. Yet she moved forward, compelled by some mixture of curiosity and stubborn pride. The front door loomed above her, a massive slab of dark wood, carved with intricate symbols that she didn't recognize. They were faintly twisted shapes, almost like faces screaming silently. The brass handle gleamed wetly in the rain. She reached out, hesitated, then turned it. The door creaked loudly as it swung open, a sound that seemed louder than it had any right to be, echoing down the hall like a scream in a cathedral. Inside, the air was cold and damp. It smelled of earth and old wood and something else she couldn't quite place, a faint metallic tang, sharp and unnerving. The hall stretched before her, empty and silent except for the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. Shadows pooled in the corners like black ink, moving slightly as if alive. Maya's heart hammered in her chest. She forced herself to take another step. "It's just a house," she whispered, more to convince herself than anything else. She began unpacking her few belongings, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that the house was watching. The walls were lined with dark wood paneling, smooth and polished, yet there were strange bumps and hollows she could not explain. The staircase curved upward in a slow spiral, disappearing into shadow. Every sound, her footsteps, the rustle of her coat, the tap of a suitcase, echoed unnaturally, stretching out into the distance. It was while she was arranging the kitchen that she noticed the door, a small, narrow door tucked beneath the staircase, almost invisible, painted the same dull gray as the wall. It was locked, and yet it seemed alive. A faint scratching sound came from within, soft at first, barely audible over the rain. It was intermittent, almost impatient, like someone or something was trying to get out or in. Maya froze. Her fingers hovered over the keyhole. She could hear her own heartbeat, thudding like a drum in the quiet house. She told herself it was just the wind or a trapped animal, but something deep inside her disagreed. It was too precise, too deliberate. The scratching repeated, quick and sharp, almost like claws raking across wood. She backed away slowly, staring at the door as if it were a living creature. She tried to focus on practicalities. Perhaps it was a maintenance closet, a forgotten room from the original construction. Perhaps it was nothing at all. But the instinctive fear remained, creeping up her spine and settling in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself had noticed her presence, that it was aware, that it had been waiting. The night dragged on. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering against the windows, wind shrieking through cracks in the walls. Maya sat in the dim light of the kitchen, unable to stop glancing at the door under the stairs. Every so often, she thought she saw it tremble, just slightly, like it was breathing. She shook her head. She had to sleep, she told herself. Just a few hours of rest, and she could begin the proper inspection of the house in the morning. But when she finally laid down in the master bedroom, the house seemed to come alive. A faint draft swept through the room, cold and deliberate, brushing against her face. The scratching from beneath the stairs had stopped, replaced by a low, almost inaudible thrum, like the beat of some enormous hidden heart. Maya tried to close her eyes, telling herself she was imagining it, but she could not shake the sensation that the house was alive, that it was breathing, and that it had been waiting for her arrival all along. The chapter ends here, establishing atmosphere, tension, and dread, while giving viewers plenty of visual and auditory cues for narration. Rain, wind, shadows, scratching, and subtle hints of the supernatural lurking just out of sight. The first night in Graymoor House had left Maya drained and restless. Sleep came only in short, uneasy bursts, filled with half-formed shadows that vanished the moment she tried to focus on them. Every creak of the floor, every sigh of the old timbers, seemed louder than it should be. But she told herself it was nothing. Houses settle, especially old ones. Then, just as the storm outside began to fade, the whispers started. It was exactly 2:17 a.m. Maya had checked the clock more than once because the precision unnerved her. At first, it was barely audible, a soft murmur like wind rustling through dry leaves. But soon, it became distinct, low voices speaking just beyond the edge of comprehension. She couldn't make out words, only the urgent, almost pleading tone. She sat up in bed, gripping the sheets. The whispers weren't coming from the window or the walls directly in front of her. They seemed to shift, moving through the house. Sometimes they came from the staircase, sometimes the ceiling, sometimes beneath the floor. Every direction she turned, the voices seemed to follow. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then the whispering began again, louder now, angrier, urgent as if she had interrupted something important. The hair on the back of her neck stood straight. She felt the temperature drop. Even though the heater hummed steadily nearby, the house itself seemed to be responding to her fear, the walls groaning as though drawing her in closer, tightening its embrace. Maya tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was the wind, or the pipes, or her own imagination playing tricks. She had been on the road all day. The storm had kept her tense, and the mansion's oppressive atmosphere could be messing with her mind. But deep down, she knew the truth. This was no ordinary house. By morning, her rationality began to crack. There were scratches on the floor near her bed, deep gouges in the wood, 3 jagged lines that had not been there before. They looked as though some creature with sharp claws had walked across the room. She had lived alone, and the house had been empty before she arrived. She tried to convince herself they were marks she had made accidentally, but the memory didn't fit. She had slept through the night. And yet, there they were, fresh and glaring in the morning light. Determined to find an explanation, Maya began inspecting the house room by room. Every corner was the same, spotless, orderly, and yet oppressive. The floors were polished to a sheen, the air clean and dry, almost too perfect. And everywhere she went, the sense of being watched followed her, a prickle of unease crawling along her spine. She returned to the door beneath the stairs, the small, mysterious alcove that had first drawn her attention. The scratching had stopped, but now there was a faint vibration in the floor beneath her feet, a subtle, almost imperceptible thrum. She knelt down, pressing her ear to the wood, and froze. It wasn't a vibration of the wind, not the hum of the house settling. It was a heartbeat, slow, measured, deliberate. The realization struck her like ice water. The house was alive. Not alive like a dog or a cat, but sentient, watching, waiting, listening. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, to run, to never come back. But she had nowhere to go. The storm had destroyed any chance of escape. Her car, parked outside, wouldn't start. The house had trapped her. That night, the whispers returned. Stronger, clearer. Now, she could almost make out the words, but they shifted too quickly, teasing her mind. Sometimes it was a name, sometimes a warning, sometimes a laugh that sounded far too human and far too wrong. Maya tried to sleep again, curling into herself, but the house would not allow it. The whispers grew louder, synchronized with something she could not see but could feel, the slow, deliberate movement of the walls themselves. She pressed her palms against the floorboards and wall panels, trying to ground herself, but the feeling only intensified. She was not alone. Hours, or maybe minutes, later, she heard a new sound, a scraping, low and deliberate, coming from the room below her bed. Her pulse quickened. She dropped to the floor, peering into the shadows. Nothing moved, yet she could feel it, something lurking, waiting, circling beneath her. Her phone buzzed, a text from a friend, though she didn't remember putting it on. The message was simple, chilling. Leave before it notices you. She dropped the phone, heart hammering. The whispers crescendoed, louder than ever, echoing from every direction at once. They were no longer mere sounds. They were commands, threats, promises. The walls seemed to pulse, breathing with her own fear, pressing closer as if the house had a heartbeat that matched hers. Maya backed into the corner of the room, covering her ears. The whispers swirled around her, impossible to ignore, each voice speaking at once, layering over the others. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence, heavy and suffocating. The calm, however, was worse than the chaos. In the quiet, she heard her own breathing, but something else joined it. A second breath, slower, colder, measured. Not human, not hers. The house had taken notice. By morning, she realized that the house had changed. The alcove beneath the stairs no longer seemed entirely solid. Shadows pulled differently in the corners. The air felt heavier, thick with the weight of unseen eyes. She understood with a sickening certainty. Graymoor House didn't just whisper. It listened. It responded. It learned. And now, it had begun to mark her. Maya had arrived thinking she could rationalize everything, that superstition was a fool's weapon. But the house was proving her wrong. And she knew, deep in her gut, that she could no longer leave. Not yet, and perhaps not ever. The whispers were patient, and so was the house. This chapter builds psychological terror, develops the idea of the house as a sentient entity, and sets up the horrifying escalation that will occur in chapters 3 to 5. It provides plenty of sound cues and tension beats perfect for narration, like the whispers, scratching, heartbeat, and second breath. The days after the whispers began felt endless. Maya tried to occupy herself with the house, dusting, cleaning, examining the walls, but nothing could erase the sense of being observed. Every shadow seemed too deliberate, too controlled. When she moved a chair, a shadow shifted in response, as if the house itself were mocking her, testing her. It started subtly at first, figures in the corner of her eyes that disappeared when she looked directly at them, curtains fluttering when there was no breeze, reflections in mirrors that did not match her own movements. She told herself she was imagining things, the product of isolation and fear. But deep down, she knew that fear was not imaginary. It was survival instinct, screaming at her that something inside the house was alive, aware and watching. One evening, Desperate for distraction, she climbed the narrow attic stairs, the wood groaning under her weight. The attic smelled of dust, rot, and something older she couldn't name. Boxes of old belongings lined the walls. Her uncle's possessions, furniture covered in thick sheets, books whose spines were brittle and cracking. As she rifled through the attic, she found a stack of old photographs tied together with faded ribbon. Her fingers shook as she untied the bundle. The first few pictures were ordinary, portraits of her uncle at different ages, family gatherings long past, the house itself in black and white. But then she came across photographs that chilled her blood. People she didn't recognize stared from the images. Some young, some old, some barely more than children, but each face was twisted with fear. Eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams, bodies contorted as though fleeing something. Her stomach turned when she found the last photo. It was a picture of herself, not from the past week, not a recent snapshot, but older. She recognized the room immediately, the small alcove beneath the stairs. Her eyes widened as she realized the date scrawled on the back was years ago, years before she had ever stepped into this house. How was this possible? She had never been there. She had never seen this photo. And yet, there she was, standing in the shadowed alcove, staring at the camera as though she had always belonged there. Panic surged through her. The whispers returned that night, louder, more insistent. They were no longer simple murmurs. They were now almost voices, chanting her name in low, guttural tones that rattled through the walls. Maya, Maya. The repetition was hypnotic, pulling her toward the staircase, toward the door beneath it. Her rational mind screamed for her to resist, but some deeper, darker part of her felt compelled. She approached the alcove, heart hammering. Her hand shook as she touched the small door, cold and smooth, and the old brass key she found behind a painting last week fit perfectly. The door swung open easily, as though it had been waiting, anticipating her. A blast of cold air escaped, carrying with it a faint, metallic scent. Something alive lurked beyond. Stepping inside, Maya realized this was no ordinary room. The space seemed impossibly deep, stretching further than the house's architecture could allow. Darkness pooled at the edges, thick and heavy, moving as though it were liquid. Faces emerged from the shadows. Not faces she had seen in the photographs, but living, breathing, twisted figures whose eyes reflected her fear. Their mouths moved in silent screams, mouths forming words she could not hear, as though the shadows themselves were trapped in torment. Maya stumbled back, terror clawing at her chest. The walls seemed to pulse around her, breathing with a rhythm that matched the whispers outside. The figures reached toward her, jerky movements unnatural and frighteningly precise. She backed out of the alcove, slamming the door shut, but the darkness lingered, pressing against the wood as though trying to escape. For hours she sat trembling in the kitchen, lights flickering and shadows twisting. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, barely dared to breathe. Every time she blinked, she saw movement out of the corner of her eyes. Faces staring at her from the windows, the mirrors, the walls themselves. The line between reality and illusion had vanished. She began to doubt herself, wondering if she had ever been truly awake. The next day, desperate for answers, she returned to the attic. She rifled through more old boxes, hoping for some clue, some explanation. There, she found a small leather-bound journal belonging to her uncle. The entries were erratic, written in hasty scrawls, detailing the house's strange behavior. Rooms shifting overnight, whispers calling names, shadows taking form. And in the final entry, the words leapt off the page in jagged letters. The house remembers. The house waits. And now it has seen her. Maya's stomach twisted. Seen her? How could the house see her in the photograph from years ago? How could it know her? She dropped the journal, fumbling backward, her hands shaking. Outside, the wind howled through the broken branches of nearby trees, sounding almost like a voice, whispering, warning, mocking. That night, the figures returned. Shadows pooled in corners and slowly, deliberately, formed faces, dozens of them, staring at her, each one silently screaming. One of them stepped forward. She blinked, and it was her own face, twisted with terror, eyes wide and frozen in horror. Her blood ran cold. The house was showing her the truth. The faces it captured were not victims. They were reflections, warnings, previews. The whispers escalated into frantic murmurs, urging her to enter the alcove again. She wanted to resist, to flee, but she felt the pull growing stronger. The house was hungry, not for food, but for acknowledgement, for compliance, for her to become part of its collection of fear. Maya's thoughts raced. She realized the photographs, the shadows, the whispers, they were all connected. The house did not just exist. It trapped time, memory, and identity. Those who entered became part of it, their fear recorded in images, in whispers, in the very walls. And now she was next. By dawn, she had no choice but to confront the alcove again. The house had marked her, and she could feel it pressing in, bending her will. The shadows, the whispers, the faces. They were calling her forward. She could feel the pulse of the walls beneath her fingers, vibrating in anticipation. And she knew, deep down, that whatever waited inside the dark room beneath the stairs would not let her leave. Not tonight. Not ever. This chapter expands the psychological horror, reveals the supernatural abilities of the house, and introduces a terrifying twist of Maya seeing herself in the house's mysterious photographs, reinforcing that the house manipulates reality and time. Maya had tried everything to escape Graymoor House. She had paced every hallway, checked every lock, even attempted to flee through the rain-soaked driveway. But the house had other plans. It was no longer subtle, no longer patient. Now, it wanted her to see the truth, and that truth lay beneath the stairs, in the alcove she had feared for days. Her fingers trembled as she turned the brass key in the lock. The small door opened easily, as if the house itself had been expecting her. A cold breath rushed out, carrying the faint scent of iron and decay, and she felt the temperature drop sharply. The darkness inside seemed to stretch infinitely, a black void that defied reason. The moment she stepped in, the door slammed behind her. Panic gripped her. She tried to push it open, but it would not budge. The walls themselves seemed to press inward, close enough to touch, almost breathing against her skin. The air was thick, heavy, tasting faintly metallic, as if the house fed on fear itself. Maya realized with mounting terror that the alcove was no longer a simple storage space. It was a gateway, a room that should not exist. The space seemed impossibly deep, stretching far beyond the dimensions of the house above. Her flashlight illuminated walls covered with scratches and symbols that shifted as she looked at them, like they were alive. Lines bent unnaturally, twisting into shapes that resembled screaming faces, their mouths opening wider than possible. Shadows pulled at the edges of her light, moving as though liquid, slipping across surfaces with intentional, malevolent grace. And then she saw them. Figures, tall, faceless, contorted, emerged from the darkness. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, yet precise. They circled her silently, their heads tilting as if listening, studying. Their bodies were thin and gray, skeletal, but their presence was undeniably physical. She could feel the floor vibrate slightly with each step they took. Fear gripped her chest so tightly it was hard to breathe. The whispers returned, but now they were unmistakable. Clear, urgent, and commanding. Come, stay, belong. They pulsed through the room, echoing from every wall at once, pressing into her mind. Her rational thoughts screamed for her to run, to escape, but the house had already broken her resistance. It had seen her fear, measured it, and was now feeding on it. She stumbled backward, tripping over an unseen lip in the floor, and fell hard. The flashlight rolled away, illuminating a wall partially covered in what appeared to be old photographs. Thousands of them. Faces stared back at her, some familiar, some horrifyingly alien. Her own image appeared in the cluster, distorted, screaming silently. The realization hit her like ice. The house recorded its victims, capturing them not just physically but spiritually. And now she was being added to its collection. From the shadows, a hand, or something like a hand, emerged. It was thin, elongated, with fingers that seemed to bend in impossible directions. It reached toward her, not violently, but deliberately, patiently, like a predator testing its prey. She scrambled backward, but the walls seemed to pulse, moving slightly, shrinking the room, pushing her closer to the hand. Maya screamed a sharp, piercing sound that bounced off the walls and was swallowed instantly. The figures began to close in, circling her tighter, forming a ring of dark intent. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly now, a sickly red pulsing that matched the rhythm of the whispers, which had grown into a chorus of demands. She pressed her hands over her ears, but she could still hear them inside her skull. Maya belonged now, she realized, with a shiver that froze her blood, that the house didn't just trap people. It claimed them. It absorbed memory, identity, fear, and left nothing but a hollow shell. Those photographs were not mere images. They were remnants of the people who had entered before her. And now, she was destined to join them. Desperate, she tried to find another exit, any crack or opening, but the space had no edges, no boundaries. The walls twisted around her, and the ceiling stretched higher than her eyes could see. The figures reached closer, their faceless heads tilting unnaturally, silent accusations in their posture. A low, guttural hum began to rise from the floor itself, vibrating through her body, resonating with her heartbeat, syncing her fear with the rhythm of the house. A sudden thought struck her. The house was feeding on her acknowledgement. The more she feared, the stronger it became. If she could resist, if she could deny it, perhaps she could escape. But defiance was nearly impossible when the very air pressed against her lungs, when the walls themselves seemed to whisper her name, and the shadows whispered back in voices she could almost understand. She remembered the journal she had found in the attic, her uncle's final entry. The house remembers, the house waits. And now it had seen her. Maya's pulse quickened. The house had seen her. It had chosen her. There was no ignoring it, no bargaining. The figures moved closer, and in a sudden flash, she saw them clearly, not faceless, but mirrors of herself. Every fear, every doubt, every moment of weakness was reflected in their warped forms. Her chest tightened. She realized with horror that the house wasn't just alive. It was sentient, learning, mimicking, adapting. It didn't just trap people. It reshaped them into shadows of themselves, leaving only terror behind. Maya backed into a corner, shaking, her mind teetering on the edge of collapse. She could hear her own breathing, ragged and shallow. Then, faintly, she heard another breath, slow, deliberate, measured, colder than her own. The house had joined her. It was breathing with her, synchronizing, preparing. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed, knowing she could not fight it with strength alone. The only weapon she had left was her mind, her awareness, and her resolve. But as the walls continued to pulse, the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo and the faceless figures loomed. She understood the truth. Graymoor House would not let her leave. Not tonight. Not ever. And as the room itself seemed to close in around her, stretching infinitely into darkness, she realized the horrifying inevitability of her fate. The house would take her, as it had taken so many before. And the hollow room beneath the stairs would claim her identity, her fear, her soul. Forever part Graymoor's living nightmare. Time had lost all meaning in Graymoor House. Days, nights, hours, they blurred into one endless stretch of darkness and whispers. Maya had long since stopped trying to track it. Every attempt to escape the house had failed. The front door, once a promise of freedom, had become just another wall, unyielding and impossibly heavy. The windows no longer looked outside. They reflected only the house's endless shadows. The alcove beneath the stairs, the hollow room, was no longer just a room. It had grown, expanding subtly each day, stretching the house into impossible dimensions. Maya could feel it beneath her feet, beneath her skin. It pulsed like a heartbeat, synchronized it with her own. The faceless figures still circled her, their jerky movements hypnotic and deliberate, whispering her name with increasing urgency. She had tried to resist. She had tried to fight, screaming, pounding on the walls, demanding release. But resistance was futile. Graymoor House did not negotiate. It did not tolerate defiance. It was a predator, patient, clever, and relentless. Each moment she spent inside, it only deepened its hold over her. She could feel it learning her fears, cataloging her terror, waiting for the perfect moment to consume her entirely. Then one night, or what she thought was night, the whispers changed. They stopped being pleas. They became instructions. Step forward. They said, step into the light. Maya looked around, desperate and trembling. There was no light, only shadows, thick and writhing, pressing closer. The floor seemed to stretch under her, leading toward the center of the hollow room, where the walls converged into a tunnel of darkness. A low hum vibrated through the air, resonating with her bones. She wanted to scream, to refuse, but her body moved before her mind could. Step by step, she was drawn forward. The figures parted to let her pass. Faces she recognized, or thought she recognized, appeared in the shadows. Faces of the missing, the lost, the vanished. They stared at her silently, eyes wide with horror and pleading, mouths open in screams she could almost hear. Her own reflection appeared in the dark, twisted, distorted, frozen in terror. She stumbled, tripping over the floor, but the house kept her upright, guiding her forward with invisible hands. At the end of the tunnel, she found herself in a space that defied logic. The ceiling arched impossibly high, vanishing into shadows. The walls pulsed and breathed, contracting and expanding as if alive. And in the center of the room was a mirror, a tall, dark mirror framed in twisted black wood. She approached it cautiously, drawn as if by invisible threads. Her reflection smiled. Not her smile. A twisted, malicious grin that carried all the fear she had ever felt, all the despair she had tried to hide. Her eyes in the mirror were hollow, black voids, staring back at her in mocking triumph. She wanted to turn away, to run, but her body refused. It was as if the house itself had merged with her will, controlling every step. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, repeating one phrase over and over. Become one with us. Belong. Belong forever. Maya screamed, a raw, desperate sound that echoed to the hollow walls, but it did nothing. The mirror reached out. She felt her fingers stretch unnaturally, bending toward the glass as if pulled by some invisible force. Her mind screamed, but her body obeyed. Step by step, inch by inch, she was drawn forward. Then, in a sudden, horrifying moment, the mirror consumed her. She felt herself dissolve, her body separating into pieces, her memories, her fears, her very essence being absorbed. It was not painful exactly, but it was absolute, a sensation of being erased and rewritten simultaneously. She was aware but powerless, trapped in a space between existence and nothingness. The house exhaled. Outside, the front door of Graymoor House swung open, slowly, as if nothing had happened. The rain continued to fall. The street was empty, but inside, the house was different. The shadows seemed heavier, more alive. The alcove beneath the stairs pulsed faintly, as if it had added something new, something alive, something aware. Neighbors reported strange occurrences in the following days. Lights flickered at night. Faint whispers could be heard if one pressed an ear to the walls. And sometimes, if you stood outside the windows, faces appeared briefly in the darkness. Faces that disappeared the moment you tried to focus on them. Some said it was Maya. Others said it was impossible to know. The car she had arrived in had vanished. The town whispered again, speaking of the mansion as if it were a living thing. Hungry, patient, waiting for its next visitor. No one dared enter, not since the last disappearance. And somewhere, deep inside Graymoor House, a new face appeared in the dark photographs that lined the walls. It was hers, her terror frozen in time, her reflection captured for eternity. The house had claimed her entirely. If you drive past the mansion after midnight, the rain beating softly on the gravel, you might hear whispers carried on the wind. They call names, your name, perhaps, inviting you in. And if the door opens, if the shadows welcome you, the house will do what it has done for centuries. It will breathe you in. It will make you one with it. And the last thing you will hear as your body, mind, and soul dissolve into the walls is a chilling, satisfied voice echoing in your head. Welcome home. Graymoor House waits. Always. Patiently. Eternally.